Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the ISE webinar around return on investment on development programs. My name is Anne-Marie Campion. I'm the Insights Manager for the ISE, and I'll be hosting the webinar this afternoon. Lovely to see so many of you joining the call. Hope this will really flesh out some of your thoughts. I see from the delegate list, a number of you are very experienced in development, and hopefully this will give you lots of opportunity to reflect on your own programs. This is part of a series that we're working on in the ISE currently on development. It's a key time for us. We've got our flagship development conference on the 7th of May at the Connaught Rooms in London, and tickets still available. So urge you to sign up for those. A really packed agenda on that one-day programme with some fascinating sessions. This webinar is going to be led by Helen Fawcett, who is the Head of Early Careers at National Grid, and also a board director of the ISE, together with Dan Dingle, Head of Development Programmes at Grid. And I'll let them introduce themselves more as they start their section of the webinar. Really timely topic, I think, for development and return on investment. We were just talking ahead of the call. There's so much volatility, I think, currently in our emerging talent market. Geopolitical volatility, economic volatility, and then the rapidly changing workplaces with AI. I think we've moved a long way from, oh dear, candidates use AI when they do their applications, way beyond that, to really how AI is reshaping the roles within the workplace for graduates, for apprentices, and indeed for all of us. Really want to make sure that this is driven around your needs, your wants from this webinar. So please use the Q&A function in the toolbar. The Q&A, please, rather than the chat, to post your questions. I will be monitoring that throughout the webinar, and we'll set aside a session, 10-15 minutes at the end, so we can talk through all of the questions and all of the concerns that you have, and hopefully leave you in a more informed and better place at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to move on without any further ado, hand over to Helen, who's going to lead us through this webinar.
Oh, bro, thanks, Anne-Marie. Hi, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out on a Thursday lunchtime on what's hopefully a sunny day for you as well. So we were talking as we were setting the webinar up about how it'd be quite nice to be outside at this time of day. So thank you. And if anyone is sitting in the garden or outside during this time, good for you as well in terms of doing that. So I'm Helen Fawcett, Head of Early Careers at National Grid. So I'm responsible for all the development that we do for our students, our interns and graduates in the US and the UK. And I also work on our management development as well, because we recognise that managers are very early in their careers typically, and the influence that they have on our early careers is critical. So I have ownership of both of them. I'm going to be leading the beginning bit of the webinar, and then Dan will join us. So Dan will introduce himself when we get to the next stage. I'm going to run through some slides with all of you in terms of some context, and then we'll get into a good conversation about return on investment as well. As part of I'm also an ISE board member, so since last year, which I really love in terms of helping shape the strategy for the ISE as well. So I'll be at the development conference in 2 weeks' time as well. So if anybody wants a quick chat or to talk about anything, please do spy me out on the day as well. So in terms of return on investment, it's a hot topic, let's face it. And for the whole 20 plus years, if I was to age myself too much, return on investment has always been, in my career, that kind of that kind of chalice that everybody's going after in terms of what they want. And you know, there's lots of ways we can do that, lots of models out there, but this session's really focused on, no matter what data you have, whether it's perfect or imperfect, how can you influence stakeholders with it? How can you make decisions with your data? And think about it as not as a destination that you need to get to, this perfect day when you get all that return on investment, but it's about a journey of how you collect that data, how you influence others, and how you influence decisions along the way as well. So let's think of it as a navigation tool for everybody. So we're going to talk a bit about how we influence senior stakeholders. And then, as Anne-Marie said, at the conference, there'll be more topics on this as well. So there'll be lots of things that you can follow up as professionals over the coming months via the ISE as well. So I suppose let's think about when return on investment comes up. So if I will ask you to take a moment's pause, what usually happens in your organisation? So I'll give you some options, and just I give a little nod if you think this is one of them. We might over-explain the data. We might think, oh, actually, this happened, but this was why, and we over-explain it. Sometimes a leader might change the exam question. We thought we were going after this, but now that's changed, and no one told us along the way. The conversation might stall because the ROI doesn't necessarily show us what we need. Or sometimes decisions seem disconnected from the evidence you've presented. So you could have said we need this direction, but a decision's made and it doesn't tally up. So we've all probably been in those moments where it's like which route do we take in terms of the data that we have. So I think we wanted to think about what are senior leaders interested in to help with those moments where you might feel about what to do next. So what are they interested in? And to me, and some of the reading I've done and work I've done, is they're interested in three things: risk, cost, and confidence. And those are the three things that really help them make their decisions, and help them frame what they're doing next. So if we think about that as a session, kind of what risks are your senior leaders thinking about? What do they need to help them go? Is it attrition in critical roles? Is it capability gaps that need to be filled? Is it talent and succession that's their focus? In terms of cost, what are they worried about? Are they worried about rehiring costs? Are they worried about underperformance and the cost that that brings to the organisation? Or are they worried about time to productivity? And we know at National Grid, that's something that really is on our leaders' mind, actually, in terms of how competent, how productive are our early careers entrants. And also, what's their confidence? Can this new workforce that's coming through, can they deliver the plan that we have, the strategic aims that we have as an organisation? So leaders ask for a return on investment from us so they can make trade-offs across risk, cost, and confidence. And so if we can hit one of those or a few of those, that will help your conversation go forward. So I suppose it's worth having a think about when you're talking about ROI in your organisation, what is it that you need to focus on? Is it the risk that somebody's worried about that you may be able to help solve or mitigate that risk through your return on investment? Is it cost? Can you help them save money? Or if you're more of a business development side organisation, can you help generate revenue? Or is it confidence, to make sure that your return on investment gives them confidence that this development's working, this pipeline's working, and we're getting a productive workforce out of the outcome of it as well? So I think if we frame it on those three things, that really helps. And then it's how do you tell that story? And what we've been doing at National Grid a lot recently is thinking about how we do storytell as leaders. How do we take people on that? And and which way do we do it? How much do we use data? How much do we take people on that rational journey versus that emotional journey? And we've actually been looking a lot to the world of theatre to help us do that. So hopefully you'll indulge me while I talk about what we can learn from the theatre as early careers professionals. Sadly, no field trip to the West End for this part, but definitely what I'm sharing is things that we've distilled from some actors and professional storytellers that we've had working with us recently. And even last week, I was at a development session for senior leaders within National Grid, and we talked about this very thing. So it's been very topical for all of us. So once you've understood what motivates your leader, whether it's risk, cost, or confidence, you need to make your data and ROI really credible and to tell that story. So if you can do that, if you can triangulate all of those things, how can you do that to tell that story? And that credibility has three layers. So having some internal signals that you can give, so those different things that you have in your spreadsheets and whatever it is that you may be tracking. What external things can you bring in? And obviously the ISE provides those of that external benchmarking data. The upcoming development survey provides that. And then what's the operational impact? How does it land? So if you think about the world of theatre, they're very intentional. So they will set the context and they'll be very intentional in terms of what they do, and kind of share their story. So there's lots of examples of how this plays out in the real world, how you can tell a story. And last week they told the story of, for those of you who are can remember the story, the film Jaws. We had this explained to us in the story of Jaws. I won't do that one for you today, but thinking about what can you learn about how a story in a movie or a theatre is told by actors. So know your audience as a start off. Before you step on stage, it's all shaped by who's in the room. So you need to reflect their pressures, their risks, their decisions. So what do they need? What do they need from you in terms of you being that actor and how you're presenting everything? Enter with intention. So actors enter every scene wanting something. So you need to enter that room wanting something, to get that information. What's your aim of doing this influencing and using your ROI? Embody the story, don't overperform it. So really know your data, and really talk about it, but understand the impact and be able to really give that kind of grounded presence with it, as opposed to feeling that it's more kind of performative in terms of what you're doing. I know there's an irony in that when I'm saying be an actor, but it's the two balance between the same. Pacing matters. So think about when you're talking about your ROI, think about how your pacing works in terms of how you can take people on that journey, and how you can utilize it to gain some urgency when you need it, or if you want to bring confidence, to bring that calmness, and how do you do that in your pace as well. I think other key things are make the audience do some of the work. So a theatre trusts an audience to join the dots in the story. If you go and see a thriller, you're working out who's done it, as an audience member. So think about that when you're telling your story. You don't necessarily need to go out with everything. Let the audience join those dots as well in terms of what you're telling as your story as well. And make sure every scene that you have, so every data point that you have, or every part of your story has earned its place. Think about the amount of things that happen in rehearsals, whether it's theatre or movie. They will have scenes that are cut out, so bits that I'll go on the cutting room floor essentially. So what is it that you really want to tell, and make sure that every piece that you tell is really key, and don't go too far in the detail if you don't need to as well. And end with a resolution. So be clear on that, what happens at the end and what's the next part of the story as well. So it's just an interesting way of reframing how we do everything, because I think a lot of conversations that I've had with people is when they talk about ROI, people are usually focused on a couple of key things, and it's about really thinking about what story can you take people on to make them understanding the ROI, whether it's good ROI, maybe it's a bit indifferent ROI, whatever it may be, that it helps them shape that story along the way as well. So next time you're at the theatre, think about what you can take from that and what you can learn from it as well. Okay, so I think what would be good is to do a bit of audience participation here. So you're my audience now, is to think about what is it that your leaders are interested in. So it'd be great if you could just write down, what is it? Is it risk? Is it cost? Or is it confidence? Or all three? And then write out this sentence and then post it in the chat in a moment. Is our program, and then you need to decide whether it reduces or increases a risk, a cost, or a confidence. And then by, and then how you do that. Okay, so I'll give everyone a few minutes to do that. And then I will stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat. So Dan, you can do it as well for National Grid.
Bear with, I will go on mute.
So I'm just typing, thank you, Laura, for the question. I'm just typing it into the chat. So you need to write, our program reduced or increased cost, risk, or confidence? And think about it. And it's just to get thinking about what it might be doing. And it's just interesting to know across the board what's everybody doing in terms of, are we all working on development programs that are reducing or increasing costs, risk, or confidence? And how do you do that? Thank you, Dan, for being the starting one there. So National Grid, our programme reduces risk by ensuring that business have suitably trained employees when they need them. Real. Thank you, Steph. So working on a range of programs, I think all three are relevant. Yep, that's a good shout. And I think they definitely are. I think it's about dialing up which one it might be for your people. I'll let people think about it, and it probably is that you're all thinking, well, it's all three. So do that. So I'll switch over to Dan now in terms of what we do. So we thought we'd do a bit of a showcase of what we do at ROI at National Grid for this call, and think about all the tools that we use, and think about how we talk about risk, confidence, and cost at National Grid as well. For those of you who might not be familiar with this as an organisation, it's probably something that you know of. You've all using electricity for this call, so you'll know us in that way, shape, or form. But we're at the forefront of the energy transition in the UK and in the northeast corner of the US. And that's usually the most common part of us, as people don't realise we've got US presence as well in terms of Massachusetts and New York State as well. We're currently investing 70 billion over the next 5 years, and we've just entered the FTSE 10 because of that. So we've got a lot on our plate. We've just had a new chief exec, we've just had a new chief people officer as well. So we've got lots of change happening as an organisation. And about 2-3 years ago, one of our strategic aims became building tomorrow's workforce today. And that basically then turned to Dan and I to go, okay, over to you two in terms of what does that mean for apprentices and graduates coming through into the business across everywhere. And we've definitely seen significant growth in our early careers populations coming in, not in terms of numbers, but also just in terms of the breadth of programs we're now offering and the roles that are now there that weren't there 3 years ago as well. So the pace of change is really fast. We're really dealing with leaders with wanting pace and wanting us basically to have that workforce ready yesterday, not tomorrow, essentially, and doing that. So we're doing that. So I've invited Dan along because he brings that apprenticeship lens. So I'm going to essentially interview Dan, and I don't know what he's going to say. So it's kind of a bit of a, get the moment. And he's already done one webinar today as well. So he's hot off the external bit. So would you like to just open up just to introduce yourself, Dan, and share a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you. So Dan Tingle, my role title is Head of Development Programs, and I joined National Grid over 25 years ago as an apprentice myself. Moved into an operational role, and then 20 years ago, I moved into an L&D role, into a training role, and since then I've carried out various different roles in our technical training function. A few years ago, I moved into this role to be responsible for our technical programs within National Grid in the UK. So I am responsible for various different programs. Predominantly, these are apprenticeships, and the largest volume we have is on apprenticeships. But we do have apprentices in technical roles, in non-technical roles, and last year I was very fortunate to be nominee for 2 Ofsted inspections for both parts of our UK business.
Yeah, and we did flying colours on both of those, so well done.
Thank you.
that. So yeah, lots of experience. So I know you briefly touched on the apprenticeship programme. Could you give a bit of context in terms of the size, what's our volumes that you look at National Grid and the types of roles that we're hiring in?
So we have on technical training programs at the minute, we have just over 1,300 learners on programs. Over 800 of those are on apprenticeships. We are also an employer provider. So we are an employer of apprentices, and we're also the apprenticeship provider for the more niche technical roles where there are few providers out in the country that can give us that service. So again, because we're an employer provider, like I said, we do come under the Ofsted scrutiny, and the two inspections that we had in July for our transmission business, we were on the old Ofsted inspection framework where we had a outstanding result, and that gave us 20 years of consecutive outstanding grades for transmission. In the distribution part of our business, we were inspected in December on the new toolkit, and we got strong standard across the board on that new inspection framework. Typically, we take on about 350 apprentices a year, and it is driven by strategic workforce planning. So we work with our various business areas to make sure that they are getting the right skills at the right levels that they need. Predominantly, we're talking technical operational roles. So we're maybe high voltage network design, asset maintenance, network management. But then, like I said, we also have smaller volumes in sort of support functions in finance, IT, HR, and then we have some non-apprenticeships in technical areas or maybe project management and things like that.
Cool. No, that's great. And yeah, so going off the back of, 20 years of great Ofsted inspections and kind of having a very high expectation of quality across the business, which factors are senior leaders at National Grid interested in the most? And has that changed over the last few years?
Um, yeah, definitely changed. I think historically we had a big focus on volumes, big focus on cost versus funding, and also the regulatory assurance that goes with the different programs that we do. Similar to what you've mentioned in your opening, is that we now have a significant focus on time to competence, some real challenges from the business in that area. I think we've always had and we always will have a focus on retention and progression, making sure that people stay in the organization where it's right to, and that the roles have progression routes within them. But then also a lot of focus on risk. So we're talking compliance, we're talking completion data, we're talking success data, and where we do talk about the data itself, what we've found in the past recent years is that we do have strong data and we do have a wealth of good data. And I think what that has done is it does build confidence. It does reassure the business that there's value for money. It does show that we are working with the business by giving them the data that's aligned to their needs. And also it shifts the conversation from being all about cost into actually its timeliness and readiness. So it's making sure that we have got the workforce readiness rather than just a throughput of learners through programs.
Yeah, no, and that's really interesting. And yeah, that pressure. And there's a difference in pressure, isn't there, between yours and my roles in terms of the time to competence is much more a higher topic of concern and consideration for the apprentices, where for the graduates there is a lesser pressure on that as the main. There's more of an acceptance that graduates have been hired in for a role. They'll do their 18-month program, and that they will contribute from day one. Where obviously the nature of an apprenticeship is different, isn't it? So even you and I in the same organisation have different, we both talk about retention and progression, but time to competence is definitely a key one for you, isn't it, in terms of that return on investment?
Yeah, 100%. And I think in more recent years, since the introduction of endpoint assessments, it's been much more challenging. If we go back to when I did my apprenticeship, typically all of apprentices would finish on time. You had a start and an end date to your program, and it had to be either illness or some real performance issues that meant people didn't finish on time. But now with planning endpoint assessments, everybody does finish at different times. There is much more focus on National Grid at making sure that people do finish on time,
Yeah.
which is a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's an interesting one. I'm sure challenges that folks on the call are facing as well. So I suppose we have quite a lot of data at National Grid, don't we, in terms of everything, but sometimes it might not always give us the perfect answer. So when have you, can you have an example where you've had the data that didn't give you the perfect example that you needed, but you still had to use it to help leaders make a better decision or a better next step?
Yeah. So I think I'm just trying to think of the best one. So what we've got is we had um, we had a lot of tracking in place for apprentices. Like I said, the the motivation to get people to complete on time. We had tracking data in place that tells us that where learners are in regards to their program performance at 12 to 6 months before completion, 6 to 3 months before completion, and 0 to 3 months towards the end of the programs. And we had that data, and it's quite high level, it's quite generic. And what it does do is the business are asking us that they need a skilled workforce in time. So we have a strategic workforce plan. The business will say, in 3, 5, 10 years, I need X amount of apprentices or operational workers at this period. And so we need to deliver in those times. So we track people through our programs. What the data does is it gives leaders confidence that learners are approaching the end of their programs, they're on time to complete their programs, and therefore they will have the roles that they need to operate the high voltage network. What it doesn't show is what the root cause of any problems are. What delays may come about due to planning or delivery issues. And so we have the data, we provide the business with the data, but what we also have is an underlying the data that's underlying in it, which is known, understood, and developed by specialists within my team that know the context, that know mitigations, and any learners that are not on track to complete, we've got structured plans in place. So I think it's really good that we have the data to provide to leaders, but actually having the expertise that sits within it is really key to give that confidence that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, no, and that's really good. And I think, yeah, at times of change and when there's a lot of pace, people need that confidence, don't they? Because if they're thinking about 27 different other things, they need to know that what we're doing is definite. And I know from the graduate side, we definitely we focus a lot on retention and progression and how those graduates are filling those roles going forwards as our return on investment. And I mean, Dan and I have a shared Power BI that is, I think it goes back to 1999, doesn't it, in terms of when time began in early careers.
That's when I started.
Yeah, there you go.
When time began.
So in terms of all of early careers at National Grid, we can see, you know, who all of our joiners, leavers, movers, shakers, and up until recently, one of those was our chief exec as well, our previous chief exec, John Pettigrew, who'd come through the graduate route. But we can easily see that, which is a great position to be in, because at any moment we can say, in terms of those two key measures. But those are two key measures, and to Dan's point, that confidence we can bring in terms of the quality and that time to competence is also really key for us, because the risk is that if we don't have our workforce ready at the pace of change and the amount of investment we're doing in the grid, we know we need those roles and those skills to be in place as well. Okay, so if you could give one piece of advice to everyone on the call, or anyone who might watch the recording, in terms of ROI and how to articulate to senior leaders, what would it be?
I think again the way that you positioned the call was around understanding your stakeholders. So you need to understand what the business definition of ROI is, what the value that the business are expecting or your customers are expecting, and the cost, time, effort sort of analogies. It varies by organisation. We at National Grid, we need that workforce readiness. Like you said, we've got £70 billion worth of infrastructure projects to carry out. We can't do that without people, without people that are trained. So the focus for us is on that readiness. So timely completion, not just for anybody that's within apprenticeships, not just qualification achievement rates, but actually people finishing programs on the date that they're expecting is sort of key. So I think working with customers, understanding what success means to them, and then developing your data so that it does tell that story that customers and stakeholders are expecting.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, yeah, it is definitely, and that's a big lesson I've been going through the last year or so, is like really understanding the needs of the business to bring that ROI. It doesn't need to be what I might think as a textbook answer. It's what really drives those business results, actually, and knowing all those parts of the business as well, because we all work in complex organizations, to understand what a finance department might need versus a technical department, or whatever it might be. So I think it's definitely key. And I suppose interesting, we're obviously on an ISE webinar. How do you use external data to back up your ROI?
Yeah. Again, to sell that story, to add credibility, to add context into what we do, we try and use as much external data as we can. So where we talk about timely completion being the push that we've got underway, and again, interesting what you said around sometimes the story does change, sometimes the business does want different things, and so timely completion is our current focus, but we've had different areas of focus in the past. But timely completion isn't something that we can readily get from the external market. But what we can get is qualification achievement rates. So they're published for apprenticeships. And so what we've done more recently is try to show the business how we're performing against external markets in a similar metric. So we've really pushed that. In terms of our delivery as well, we make sure that we use external data to measure how we're performing in terms of diversity, whether it's female participation in engineering roles. We use external data to make sure that we are pushing the boundaries of where we can perform, but also that we compare it to organizational levels and engineering levels. So we make sure one of the metrics that we have is the number of females that we've got on program, and then we compare that to the number of females as a percentage in STEM engineering roles in wider engineering organizations, and within the organization itself, to try and see that we are comparing something that's relatively equal. And again, it sets realistic goals that we've got in place. And like you said, the credibility with leaders is quite key. So if they can see how we're measuring against external organizations or external measures, then I think it's really good from a credibility perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, most of the questions I always get asked is what's the external benchmark? How are we doing? Because I think by nature folks want that external lens, but there is also an element of competition as well, isn't there, in terms of how are we doing? And definitely, I know them in the utilities world, we have a real strong network, don't we, with our everybody's in the supply chain, and that's a great world in which we can share as well to help one another in terms of everything. But I know definitely in the graduate world, we very much look to see what everyone else is doing, whether it's in like for like organizations or completely different ones, actually, to have that, you know, kind of see what's going well, to really learn. But I do really understand that in a graduate world you can play a little bit more sometimes, where with apprenticeships it's slightly different. But we can definitely look to other worlds and see what that data brings as well, especially on retention of graduates, to see who's keeping them and what's that secret sauce that they're using and keeping to keep those graduates there as well. Okay, so I think that's the end of our kind of question part and offering. So hopefully for all of you, I imagine it's definitely whistle-stop tour of a few different things to think about what we're thinking about at National Grid, and in terms of ROI, in terms of risk, confidence and cost. Obviously a little bit about the theatre in terms of how we tell those stories with our data as well, to just make you think about a different world to learn from. And hopefully the conversation has just given you a few insights into what we're doing in both the graduate and apprentice world. And I think definitely if it's a topic that you're interested in, there's lots more coming out from the ISE on this. So I'll hand over to Anne-Marie to give us a bit of a ISE perspective as well.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Dan. Yes, and I've got quite a lot of questions as well that I want to pose that I've got, and also that I've heard from various conversations with members over the last few weeks. So I'll go this. I mean, I think the key to so many things to pick up. So we have got the new development survey, which will come out on the 7th of May. That comes out in conjunction with the conference. I've read it, but I can't give too many teasers because that's sort of still in final sort of refinement before it's published on the 7th of May. But I think picking up on the things that you said, it does give you that really insightful data across sectors. So the way that Dr. Claire Tyler, our heads of research, and our colleagues at Derby University who put it all together, it cuts it in so many different ways across your own industries, but also across all those different sectors, and highlights the differences or the nuances, where it's easy to say, oh, retention is X, but that's different across different markets. And also the data will tell you why people leave, and also to what extent organizations have got people that they have queries about their performance, for example, that there's that data in there. So I think that's really worth people making sure that they sign up to get that data. Remember that the research reports are only available, the full research reports are only available for members. So that's part of the real golden ticket, if you like, of being a member of the ISE. I mean, I think headlines that we're hearing, commitment to early careers hiring is still there at high levels. There is some flips. Hiring in the graduate market, there was an 8% decline on numbers last year. That was in our recruitment survey. But the commitment to early careers hiring, perhaps a slight rebalancing to the apprentice market. So in overall terms, the reduction in the labour market is very, very small. And yet you go on some social media sites and it's like, oh my goodness, the graduate market has just imploded. There are no jobs out there. There is loads we could talk about that, and we will do other webinars and in conferences, but the commitment to early careers hiring is still there. I think the whole question of how AI reshapes roles, and that's what we're hearing more. It's about reshaping rather than replacing. And it is about changing the tasks that early careers hires will do, but then also shifting, if you will, the skills balance that is required. I mean, I think broad brush, both from our survey from 2025, but also our impending survey, is that adaptability will be ever more important. Because if you're an apprentice coming in on one of Dan's programs, 4-year program, 3-year program, 4-year program, the world you're coming in September 26. Well, in 2030, that will be a very different workplace. Coming in even on an 18-month grad program, Helen, in 2026, 2028 will be different. So that ability of those individuals to adapt to the workplace is key. The other trends that we're hearing around how important resilience is, but also how many issues young people are having in the work, how many issues young people are having generally, but particularly in the workplace around anxiety. And so well-being, and that whole point that you've made about getting people to competence being such a key driver. Well, that's more than just the technical competence or the KSBs that they need to show in their apprenticeship. Many young people we're hearing are impeded in their journey to competence through the personal issues, the well-being issues that they face in the workplace. So I think that's quite an interesting angle. And then the work readiness. Mostly people are talking about the self-awareness, resilience. In apprentice world, written skills, communication skills. We're still seeing so much fallout from the pandemic. If we're looking at the cohorts coming in 2026. They will have been at school in a time where they were not at school, if that makes sense, that they were not physically at school in that period. And that consequence on anxiety, on the ability to socialize, on professional impact. We hear that so much from members in terms of the in readiness is around, not just the specific skills that you might identify or data analysis or such like. This is around knowing how to behave in the workplace, and that is will come out, I'm sure, again in our development survey in May. So there are other things that employers have to do to get them to competence, which is beyond the technical capability. Those are some real trends that we're hearing. But if it's okay with you, I wanted to pick up on some other strands just to get some more thoughts from you. And as I was listening to both of you present, and I was also mindful of lots of things that have come into my inbox from members, as well as the things that I'm thinking of. So in no particular order, really, wanted to go through some questions with you. And I guess one of the things that I wanted to ask, it was around one of the challenges in influencing, as you said, influencing senior leaders. Do you find that there is a different approach that you have to take if the senior leader is just all over early careers, like maybe they've been an apprentice like Dan has, or that they just really understand early careers, or opposed to somebody who absolutely knows nothing about early careers? They have no. Do you find that your approach to influencing has to change dependent upon their knowledge base?
Shall I go first, Dan? Yes and no. So I think sometimes for us, actually, sometimes that experience they've had in our programs can sometimes hinder, because they might be using their point of reference from when they went through the program, and so then it can be sometimes hard for them to see actually the work that we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. So we sometimes find that actually we need to do some of that storytelling with them, because in the last couple of years we've done quite a lot of changes on all of our early careers programs, that we need to take them on that journey of this is what we've done and this is why the ROI is this now. So we can see some changes that we made probably about 3 years ago have actually really increased our retention and progression. So, and we want to tell that story with them to show it's because we were really intentional and we made specific interventions that we did it. So I actually find sometimes is still the storytelling piece, actually. It's just your starting point of that story might be a bit different, actually. We're really lucky. We've got lots of stakeholders that are really, really back what that we do, and want it done. And we've got a lot of passionate people about early careers.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about you, Dan, from the apprentice side? I mean, I come from an employer background, and the number of conversations I used to have was, well, I was an apprentice, so obviously I know everything there is to know, even though their experience of apprenticeships was somewhat historic.
Yeah. So we do have quite a lot of that, because our retention is really high across our apprenticeships. And like I said, predominantly our apprenticeships are looking at technical operational roles. And after 5 years, we still retain over 90% of our apprentices. After 10 years, we retain over 80% of our apprentices. So we do have lots of people in the organisation that went through one of our programmes. But again, I fully agree with sort of Helen's response. But I think it just comes back to knowing that stakeholder again, knowing what the return on investment data is, or the data, whatever data it is that you're putting in front of a stakeholder, knowing what is the right story to tell to that individual. And you only know that by knowing your stakeholder. And again, if you've got good data, if you've got positive data, then it just helps with that story. So like I say, when one of the things that we can do is tell leaders that 9 out of 10 people are going to be staying with you after 5 years, it helps that conversation that we're going to be having. So it's a strong starting point.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that leads me on to one of the other questions that I had, and that would also be to both of you. But it's around that when you've got very different, so in a business as complex and as big as National Grid, and Helen, you've got obviously experience from the US side. Do you find that you've got to understand your senior leaders, but they are very, very diverse themselves, and they are also from, you know, hugely different areas of the business. So I guess from a point of view of the other development professionals on the call, how do you prep to actually understand all of these leaders? I mean, it's not just one person in one job, right? It's a myriad of different people.
I think we're quite lucky is like we do a lot of work in terms of seeking to understand their position and what they're doing. And we're quite lucky at National Grid in terms of everyone's quite open of each business area has its own performance contract. And there's quite a lot of transparency in terms of what each area is going after in terms of that. So you can quite easily see, well, what's their priorities? How can I hook into it and do that? So you can kind of see, I suppose, the harder data bits, the quantitative bits, you can see how you can feed in. But there's definitely styles, personalities, different things at play as well. And I think that comes through actually just spending the time with them as stakeholders and understanding them. I definitely will change my style, whether it's depending upon who it is, whether that's US, UK, whether it's a different senior leader as well. There'll be different priorities, and you can focus it in terms of whether I think that person is data, or they want to know the so what straight away, or they just want to know the story. But that takes time. And usually a lot actually lean on our people partners in our broader people function to get that intel as well, so we can really understand folks and what we need to do.
Cool. And just sorry, before I know, do you find, Helen, that there is any, you've talked about, that risk, cost, competence, those three, the mantra, if you will, around ROI. When you're working in the US, is there any divergence from that?
No, it's similar. I think it's just dialed up differently, actually. So there's a great emphasis on cost for us. And I think that's just very much about how the business generates money differently in the US and the UK. And we're a highly regulated business, but we're regulated differently. But yeah, there's a greater emphasis on what cost, to the point there can even be an interrogation of how much does it cost for a graduate to go on a day somewhere in terms of travel costs. So there can be that. So they definitely want to know, if they have spent money on something, what will they get back in terms of investment of saving money? And they want it to be quite short term in terms of return, less about kind of behavioural change lag effect. They want to know that graduate will deliver a project that's a key project that's going to deliver for National Grid within this performance year. So it's definitely that cost bit more.
Okay. How about you, Dan, from your perspective of the range of stakeholders that you have and the different their different perspectives, if you will, and your ability to influence them?
Yeah, so very similar to what Helen said. I think the only thing I would say differently is where it's appropriate, having a governance group that's established, identifying who the right level of stakeholder is to join that governance group, and then that can give you a smaller network of customers, of stakeholders to be able to influence. And we've done that in apprenticeships quite heavily. We've made sure that we've got the right individuals on our governing boards, and they can be the voice that goes out to the business then to share the positive story. They're part of some decision making that again, when you're speaking to the business, we can say we've made it in partnership with them. So I think that can be a useful key.
Yeah, definitely. And then like the temp, I mean, you mentioned Helen, new CEO coming into your organization. There are a number of our members who've said similarly, they've got changes in senior management. Um, Particularly, I'm thinking, I have worked for senior leaders who I would say are risk takers, and I've also worked for senior leaders who are risk averse. And given that you've already identified that risk is such a big component of assessment of ROI, do you think that ever comes into play with how risky they want to be, rather than that risk is in itself something they have to consider?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, traditionally, as an organisation, we're quite risk averse. I mean, it comes by nature of, we've traditionally always worked in energy, so you need to be safe and not take many risks, but definitely in terms of decisions. And I think that's changing, actually. I think the risk appetite is changing because of how much we need to do. There's a lot about, and I mean, I know it's a well-earned saying in terms of what we've always done won't get us where we need to go to. It got us there, but it won't in the future. So there's a lot more. So I think there's going to be a lot more conversations around risk actually at National Grid in terms of that, and maybe making some riskier decisions, which are still, let's face it, in the grand scheme of life, still quite safe decisions, but probably just riskier than we've perhaps taken before. So I think we'll get more questions on that about what's the limits we can take things to. And what can we push a bit more actually to get us pushing boundaries more.
Okay. Anything to add on your perception or your experience, Dan, of the temperaments of the senior leaders?
Yeah, I think in terms of risk, then like Ellen said, I think we're quite fortunate in terms of risk because number one is that we're quite a risk-averse organisation, but number two is that for our operational colleagues, is that they have really strict criteria that they need to be skilled or competent in certain areas. So we've already got a framework that we're working to. So like the significant changes and risk in changing programs is going to be very limited in what we do as a longevity piece. But yeah, no, I think Helen really covered it.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to pick up with you, Dan, again, we've had lots of, and I think I mentioned this in our sort of the webinar going live, around the changes to the apprenticeship landscape and the direction of travel. And without sort of rehashing different webinar which you've run, but I'm always happy to answer members' questions on it, is this direction of travel, if you will, behind this whole concept back in 2017, where the levy was, it was almost described as the opportunity for business to use its money to upskill, retrain, develop different apprenticeships, and ever more, without sort of knowing any direct quotes from the Chancellor, but from the messages you hear, it's now, well, this is a business tax and you have to pay it if you're a levy payer, and you can use it in part or in full to fund apprenticeships, but we're going to be quite prescriptive about what those will be. The defunding, for example, recently that we all know about. In terms of then engaging with your senior leaders of the return on investment of hiring apprentices, has that played a part at all in what your business is looking at investing in terms of apprenticeship programs, because of the changes in the funding landscape?
Yes, yeah. And again, the majority of our programs are technical, operational, where we make sure that we work with government, with Skills England, that these standards are essential for the UK economy. However, we have utilised standards in other areas of the business. So in terms of data and things like that, we have used quite a lot of programs for upskilling as well as new entry programs. And recent changes will affect the delivery of those. So I think, so yes, we have worked with leaders to adapt to changes. I think the difficulty arises in where we're trying to have strategic conversations and we don't know what the landscape is going to be in 6, 12, 18 months is really challenging. And again, when you're in early careers, typically from a recruitment cycle is you're working 12 months in advance. So any changes to standards can really hurt people. So yeah, we have seen change.
Okay, thank you. And one of the comments I heard recently from a sort of expert in this field was the last, well, since June 25, really, with the initial initiation of Skills England, there's been so much sort of tumultuous activity and volatility, and they were arguing that we're now in a period of a bit more of a sort of status quo for what we know now, just evolving over the next 2 years rather than rapidity of change. So maybe that will help in those conversations. And any, in terms of apprenticeship units which have come in, and you've just talked about upskilling, do you see from a grid perspective any opportunities within apprenticeship units to get to that, journey to occupational competence more quickly, more effectively, in a more cost effective way by using those?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we promoted and championed. So I think it's a welcome inclusion. We're just now looking at the first sort of tranche that comes out to see how applicable they are. And again, there's a couple of sort of AI leadership units that will be useful, but some of the sort of engineering ones that have come out, we're looking at how we can apply that to the workforce, because I think just having that, where we're talking time to competence, apprenticeship units are going to be really valuable to be able to enhance what the business have got in a shorter format.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so far sort of quite limited in scope, but kind of watch this space really on that, I think, for later in the year.
Yeah.
Helen, just coming back to you, and I recognise that we're sort of running out of time, but there's still a couple more things I wanted to ask. In terms, and we've spoken a lot about occupational competence and the time to competence, but that is so relevant for the members that I talk to, and I'm sure the members on this webinar. In your graduate program, 18 months, I think you said it is. What would you say are the key challenges, or what do you see as the most frequent impediments of your graduates because getting to competence in that program?
Oh, it's a couple of things actually. So I think the main bit is the terms of work readiness when they join us. Like a lot of other members, been quite surprised in the last couple of years of that level of work readiness. So I think we're having to be a bit more agile. We've got a great development program that we run, and then my team have been kind of adding in other development interventions to meet the cohort where they're at. I think the time the business has got to support them when we're going through lots of change. I think we're having to really remind managers and mentors to spend that time with them, to be in the office when they're in the office, to learn from them, to take them, to meetings or sessions that they think might add value as well, to do that. That's really doing that as well. And I think that those are for us are the main bits. So we're constantly working on it. It's something we like as a regular thing, but we have a strong network within the business that we work with to kind of provide a bit of infrastructure outside of the early careers team, to make sure that the graduates are having check-ins and to make sure they're progressing correctly. But I think as long as everyone can give them the time, and that patience and that teaching that they need, then that is just a challenge that we're slowly overcoming to make sure they can meet their objectives.
Brilliant, thank you. And that nearly brings us to the end of the webinar. So we just want to say a massive thank you to Helen and Dan for sharing their insights from National Grid and from other areas of their experience. It's been fantastic. I will never forget now risk, cost and competence. That would be my mantra that I will remember in relation to ROI. Don't forget the conference coming up on May the 7th, where you'll get more information on the data and where you'll also meet Helen, and where you would also meet Laura, who previously chatted on the call. So Laura Anderson will be running a return on investment session at conference, which we are really excited about. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining it. Have a good afternoon in or out of the sunshine, and hopefully that's been really useful to you. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.